Hello and welcome back to my channel, YouTube channel, True Life Knowledge, where we explore new interesting knowledge that makes our lives better. Today we're going to continue with Aristotle and his Rhetoric, as always read by Rocco di Pietro. And so without further ado, let us continue. It has now been shown that the ordinary writers on rhetoric treat of non-essentials. It has also been shown why they have inclined more towards the forensic branch of oratory. Rhetoric is useful because things that are true and things that are just have a natural tendency to prevail over their opposite. So that if the decisions of judges are not what they ought to be, the defeat must be due to the speakers themselves and they must be blamed accordingly. Moreover, before some audiences, not even the possession of the exactest knowledge will make it easy for what we say to produce conviction. For argument based on knowledge implies instruction, and there are people whom one cannot instruct. Here, then, we must use as our modes of persuasion and argument notions possessed by everybody as we observed in the topics, when dealing with the way to handle a popular audience. Further, we must be able to employ persuasion, just as deduction can be employed on opposite sides of a question, not in order that we may in practice employ it in both ways. For we must not make people believe what is wrong, but in order that we may see clearly what the facts are, and that, if another man argues unfairly, we, on our part, may be able to confute him. No other of the arts draw opposite conclusions. Dialectic and rhetoric alone do this. Both these arts draw opposite conclusions impartially. Nevertheless, the underlying facts do not lend themselves equally well to the contrary views. No, things that are true and things that are better are, by their nature, practically always easier to prove and more persuasive. It is absurd to hold that a man ought to be ashamed of being unable to defend himself with his limbs, but not of being unable to defend himself with rational speech, when the use of rational speech is more distinctive of a human being than the use of his limbs. And if it is objected that one who uses such power of speech unjustly might do great harm, that is a charge which may be made in common against all good things except excellence, and above all against the things that are most useful, as strength, health, wealth, generalship. A man can confirm the greatest of benefits by a right use of these, and inflict the greatest of injuries by using them wrongly. It is clear that rhetoric is not bound up with a single definite class of subjects, but is like dialectic. It is clear also that it is useful. It is clear further that its function is not simply to succeed in persuading, but rather to discover the persuasive facts in each case. In this, it resembles all other arts. For example, it is not the function of medicine simply to make a man quite healthy, but to put him as far as may be on the road to health. It is possible to give excellent treatment even to those who can never enjoy sound health. Furthermore, it is plain that it is the function of one and the same art to discern the real and the apparent means of persuasion, just as it is the function of dialectic to discern the real and the apparent deduction. What makes a man a sophist is not his abilities, but his choices. In rhetoric, however, the term rhetorician might describe either the speaker's knowledge of the art or his choices. In dialectic, a man is a sophist because he makes a certain kind of choice. A dialectician in respect not of his choices but of his abilities. Let us now try to give some account of the systematic principles of rhetoric itself, on the right method and means of succeeding in the object we set before us. We must make as it were a fresh start, and before going further define what rhetoric is. Rhetoric may be defined as the faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. So he's not saying that it is wise to invent them, but in observing in any available case the means of persuasion. This is not a function of any other art. Every other art can instruct or persuade about its own particular subject matter. For instance, medicine about what is healthy and unhealthy, geometry about the properties of magnitudes, arithmetic about numbers, and the same is true of the other arts and sciences. But rhetoric we look upon as the power of observing the means of persuasion on almost any subject presented to us, and that is why we say that in its technical character it is not concerned with any special or definite class or subject. Of the modes of persuasion, some are technical, others non-technical. By the latter, I mean such things are not supplied by the speaker but are there on the outset: witnesses, evidence, given under torture, written contracts, and so on. By the former, I mean such as we can ourselves construct by means of the principles of rhetoric. The one kind has merely to be used, the other has to be invented. Of the modes of persuasion furnished by the spoken word, there are three kinds. The first kind depends on the personal character of the speaker, the second on putting the audience into a certain frame of mind, and the third on the proof or apparent proof, provided by the words of the speech itself. Persuasion is achieved by the speaker's personal character when the speech is so spoken as to make us think him credible. We believe good men more fully and more readily than others. This is true generally whatever the question is, and absolutely true where exact certainty is impossible and opinions are divided. This kind of persuasion, like the others, should be achieved by what the speaker says, not by what people think of his character before he begins to speak. It is not true, as some writers assume in their treatise on rhetoric, that the personal goodness revealed by the speaker contributes nothing to his power of persuasion. On the contrary, his character may almost be called the most effective means of persuasion he possesses. Secondly, persuasion may come through the hearers when the speech stirs their emotions. Our judgments when we are pleased and friendly are not the same as when we are pained and hostile. It is towards producing these effects as we maintain that present-day writers on rhetoric direct the whole of their efforts. This subject will be treated in detail when we come to speak of the emotions. Thirdly, persuasion is effected through the speech itself when we have proved a truth or an apparent truth by means of the persuasive arguments suitable to the case in question. There are then these three means of effective persuasion. The man who is to be in command of them must, it is clear, be able to reason logically, to understand human character and excellences, and to understand the emotions, that is, to know what they are, their nature, their causes, and the way in which they are excited. It thus appears that rhetoric is an offshoot of dialectic and also of ethical studies. Ethical studies may fairly be called political, and for this reason rhetoric masquerades as political science, and the professors of it as political experts, sometimes from want of education, sometimes from ostentation, sometimes owing to other human failings. As a matter of fact, It is a branch of dialectic and similar to it, as we said at the outset. Neither rhetoric nor dialectic is the scientific study of any one separate subject. Both are faculties for providing arguments. This is perhaps a sufficient account of their scope and of how they are related to each other. With regard to the persuasion achieved by proof or apparent proof, just as in dialectic there is induction on the one hand and deduction or apparent deduction on the other, so it is in rhetoric. The example is an induction, the antinomy is a deduction, and the apparent antinomy is an apparent deduction, for I call a rhetorical deduction an antinomy and a rhetorical induction an example. Everyone who affects persuasion through proof does in fact use either antonyms or examples. There is no other way. And since everybody who proves anything at all is bound to use either deductions or induction, and this is clear to us from the analytics, it must follow that each of the latter is the same as one of the former. The difference between example and antonym is made plain by the passages in the topics where induction and deduction have already been discussed. When we base the proof of a proposition on a number of similar cases, this is induction. In dialectic, example in rhetoric, when it's shown that certain propositions being true, a further quite distinct proposition must also be true in consequence, whether universally or for the most part. This is called deduction in dialectic, antonyms in rhetoric. It is plain also that each of these types of oratory has its advantages, for what has been said in the Methodics applies equally well here. In some rhetorical styles examples prevail, in others antonyms, and in like manner some orators are better at the former and some at the latter. Speeches that rely on examples are as persuasive as the other kind, but those which rely on antonyms excite the louder applause. The reason for this and their proper uses we will discuss later. Our next step is to define the processes themselves more clearly. Okay, so this is the end of part 2. We're going to continue next time. Hope you enjoyed my reading. As always, I'm saying that I'm learning to improve my English because I'm not an English speaker. So hope you enjoyed my improvement and this reading. Have a great day and peace.